Welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Andrew Ziegler.
And I'm your host, Ben Lloyd Pearson.
This week, we're diving into MCP servers at scale with Brendan Irvine Broque, Director of Product at Cloudflare. But first, we're going to be diving into some news that caught our eye this week, and we got to start with a big one. DORA 2025 is here. Ben, did this catch your attention at all in the last week?
Well, considering that I was at the big event this week, Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit, where DORA always makes a big announcement around this report. Yes, it did catch my attention.
Nice.
In fact, I did get to meet some of the people from the team, including Nathan Harvey, who's been one of the big voices in the DORA community for quite a long time now. So if for anyone that's not familiar with this event, it's Gene Kim's annual event for engineering leaders. Gene Kim's an author. His latest book is Vibe Coding. Many people know him for the Phoenix Project. He's also a past guest here on Dev Interrupted. But it was a really fun event. Lots of conversations around vibe coding. It was really cool seeing a bunch of engineering leaders get introduced to vibe coding for the first time. Particularly people who haven't coded in a while, like learning these new tools and getting really excited about coding for the first time in quite a while. And it was really nice to see that being celebrated. But then also a lot of discussions about MCPs as well. So, we've been building MCPs at LinearB and so it's really nice with this emergent technology just to share strategies around what it takes to bring these stuff to market. But so the DORA report, really exciting stuff in the report this year. They made a lot of big changes. And the headline that I think has really been making the rounds, and Nathan Harvey brought this up, that, even CNN covered this, that 90% of software teams now use software on a daily basis. And in his talk, Harvey mentioned that, because of how widespread AI usage is, they're effectively just going to assume that it is ubiquitous now. And that question is probably not even going to be on future reports anymore. So pretty interesting to just think that AI is now just ubiquitous within, software development life. And I actually fully expect we'll dive into this report quite a bit more in the coming weeks. I mean, it's 140 pages, so I've only barely scratched the surface on it. But there are a few early insights that I think our audience would love to hear about already. And really the biggest takeaway that I think everyone should learn from this is that AI is an amplifier, both for the good and the bad. So if your organization has really strong engineering practices and good decision-making processes, AI enables you to leverage those benefits even more. But on the other hand, if you have poor internal practices, bad engineering infrastructure, AI is going to make your problem worse. So it's not even like the benefits of AI will be smaller. It's AI will actually make your organization worse. And the thing that really illustrates this is within the report, there's a whole bunch of spider charts on one page. Looks a little overwhelming at first, but if you really take a moment to just understand what you're looking at, it's got a lot of really interesting insights. And I think if you just look at two different types of organizations within those spider charts, teams that have foundational challenges. So, they surveyed a bunch of people and asked, what is your organization like? And they classified them based on the responses that the participants gave. So they found organizations that have foundational challenges, they have lots of problems with their engineering. And then they have organizations on the other hand who have super harmonious high achievement practices. And the teams that had foundational challenges, when they adopted AI, they had higher rates of burnout, they had more friction, they had more software instability, and worse product and engineering performance. But then on the other hand, that team of harmonious high achievers was practically the exact opposite. It's very stark how different those two organizations were. The report also unveiled what the DORA community is calling the AI capabilities model. So they've identified 7 core capabilities that enable organizations to more successfully leverage AI. And what I really like about this capabilities model is really just how well it aligns with the conversations that we're having here on Dev Interrupted. So it's things like having healthy data ecosystems that are accessible to your AI system, maintaining quality platforms, having engineering best practices like working in small batches and strong version control practices. Like if you've listened to Dev Interrupted enough, you've almost certainly heard at least one or more guests talk about these exact things in the context of AI. So like I mentioned, it's a really long report. There's a lot to unpack. So we're going to keep covering this here on Dev Interrupted. We'll probably have a Substack article about it soon enough. And I would really love to get Nathan Harvey back on to the show again, just to help break down some of the details of it at some point in the future too. So stay tuned for that, because I think we'll make it happen.
Nice. Well, thanks for the scoop on Dora. I need to dig deeper on the report, but it sounds like it's definitely been bouncing around in your head a lot. There's a lot of good insights in there. And I couldn't agree more about the stuff that you highlighted about AI being an amplifier, a magnifier, that goes both ways, both good and bad. I think that we learned that really great from Martin Woodward, the VP of DevRel at GitHub, who recently came on the show and talked about this on its most foundational level, that the teams that excel with AI are the ones that have good practices and process, strong communication and trust between each other, and a clear delineation of roles. And those with poor processes obviously suffer. And so definitely a lot of great insights that we're hearing across the board. Excited to double click on the Dora report once we can sit down with Nathan.
Yeah. Let's talk about the theater of pull requests and code review, our next story. What's this, Andrew?
Oh yes, this is a fun one in the pile. I had to, bring this one up because I love kind of like the workflow and developer bliss, and how can you achieve that Zen flow state while working on projects, especially with others, and the thoughtful engineers who think about this all day and write articles just like this. So this is something that we scooped off the front of Hacker News. It's an article by Max McClure, but it's an article about a talk he attended by Sasa Urich. He's at the Goatmeyer Elixir conference. And, I got to say, I am always reading about an interesting post-talk summary of something someone really insightful said at an Elixir conference. I really need to get myself to one of those, because it sounds like they talk about some really cool stuff there. So this talk is about tell me a story. And what Sasa frames is the art of telling a coherent story in your code through pull requests and a clean Git history, and making your PRs small and easy to understand. And it unfolds the typical way something like this might get explored. There's a little bit of Git sorcery. There's a little bit of understanding how you can actually manipulate your Git commits to tell a more clear story. And it can be a little fussy to think about on like an immediate glance. But ultimately, this story that you're telling, it's for the reviewer's benefit, not necessarily your own. And it was a really interesting dive into a flow around coding and using that coding to tell a clear story. So, Ben, what did you think of this article by McClure?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, pull requests are a common theme here on Dev Interrupted. So naturally, we had to talk about it whenever we see an article like this come up. And, there's just a lot of great conventional advice in this article, like basic stuff, like keep your pull requests small, structure your commits so that they tell like a natural story. But there was one line in particular from the article that really stood out to me, and that is, the next time you're preparing a PR, consider this. Are you telling a story that your reviewers can follow? With that said, the speaker being highlighted in this article is demonstrating some pretty outstanding Git hygiene, in my opinion.
Yeah,
that's
it is
probably one of
great.
the more interesting things about it. And I actually don't think this type of behavior is common practice on most engineering teams. Most devs that I know, they don't really go much deeper into Git beyond like the basic commands to like commit and merge code. And like maybe they like rebase from time to time, or like squash some commits. But like, yeah, I don't think Git is really like a thing that people like are really sharpening that skill a whole lot. And so I don't really know that you can like totally expect teams to operate that way consistently, particularly when you're talking about like larger engineering teams. And, hopefully I'm not upsetting too many of our listeners out there. There might be some that are jumping out of their seats when I say this. But in my opinion, Git isn't really the easiest tool in the typical dev stack to use in the first place, which I think is part of why a lot of developers don't put in the effort to learn it. In fact, I actually think the interface can be fairly confusing at times. And And then you just couple that with the fact that like we're moving faster than ever with AI. I kind of think it's a little bit unreasonable to expect your developers to work the way that is outlined in this article without providing additional tooling and automation to support that workflow. So I really love the ideas proposed in the article, but my pragmatic recommendation is don't expect your developers to do this manually on their own. Like if you actually want to incorporate practices like this, you should provide tooling and guidance that make it easy for your developers to do it. Like if you're leaving this to like an ad hoc implementation, like you're just going to get a lot of inconsistent behavior.
Totally. Like, I really feel where you're coming from. I know that place of Git being confusing. I do think it can be, there's so much that you can do in Git to express the shape of a project. And I think that we often take for granted that like the way that we use it is just one of the many forms that it can take on a day-to-day basis. But there's some good core advice there too about like keeping the PR small and your commit messages clear. But the point you made about maybe most devs not going deeper on Git, I want to challenge you a bit on that actually, because as what I'm finding when I use modern tools, that they get better and better at surfacing recommendations around what kind of commands I'm supposed to be using, both on like recommendations just in the terminal, but also agentically working with like CLI tools and being like, this is what I'm trying to do in Git. Like, what would I do? And it's really good at actually understanding what Git is. It's a well-documented, well-scoped a tool, and it can express to you what it needs to do. It could do it for you even. And so because of that, I think there's a real opportunity for teams that did want to approach things this way, to just figure out what makes it hard for folks to adapt and then create easy conversational ways to do it. So I do think that there's something for folks to explore there to figure out how to make that work for a broader team.
Now that you say that, I mean, maybe all I really need personally is just an MCP for Git. If I could just do
I don't even
natural
think you need
language.
that. An MCP, it's like you're providing it. Oh, all of these tools that do that. Git lives in your terminal. If the agent that you're talking to can use your terminal, then it can just use Git commands, just bare metal. It
That's
already
true.
understands Git. It's in its training data. I guess that's what I'm trying to call out.
Yeah, I guess you're calling me out that in the age of AI, I have no excuse for not getting more out of Git.
I'm just saying a Git is a solve for problem. So think of it as like an ingredient, like anything else that we're working with these days. But this was a cool
Yeah.
story. Loved this one. And I want to cover more like this in the future.
Yeah, great. So yeah, moving on, our next article is about how AI is not going to replace radiologists or isn't replacing radiologists. What's this about?
Yeah, so this article, AI Isn't Replacing Radiologists by Dina Musa. It's on Works in Progress. And this calls out about how radiology is a field that's highly optimized for replacing the humans that exist in it, right? At least from a bird's eye view. There's digital inputs and there's pattern recognition. And then there's clear benchmarking by comparing those results against actual diagnoses. And there becomes a lot of a territory that modern machine learning, even traditional machine learning, is well optimized to solve. And so I learned from this article that AI-enabled medical devices on the market, 80% of them are in the space of radiology and in the realm of detecting problems from radiology results. And it makes sense to me, right? You look at the image, you determine the problem with a level of accuracy, you diagnose, compare if you went right or wrong. That's what the human would do. And a machine is well optimized to fit in here. So that means all of the radiologist jobs are vanishing, right? Wrong. Of course, because reading radiology results is only a small fraction of the work a radiologist actually does. And this article does a really smart deep dive on how the market has responded or otherwise, contracted or expanded as a result of this technology. Ben, what stood out to you about what we learned here?
Yeah, well, I think you even left out the part where it's not even really replacing the work of the one thing that it is supposed to replace yet. It's still struggling to do that.
Indeed.
And in this story, it's not about software development, but I think there are a lot of parallels we can draw to how engineering teams are adopting AI today. And I want to get a little ahead of the 2026 prediction season. Here we are. It's almost October. I'm going to make my first prediction for next year. 2026 is the year that we all discover just how much work it's going to take to realize the productivity benefits of AI. So the hype bubble of the past 2 years might have you believe that AI models would soon be smart enough to start improving themselves, and they would suddenly take off at an unimaginable pace of innovation and replace large swaths of human labor overnight. But the reality that I think is emerging is that this is going to be a long, persistent slog to make AI work in all of the complexities of the real world. And some of the challenges they laid out in this article are things like, R&D training data is often limited to hardware from a single hospital, and the models fail when you introduce it to new hardware. So think about all the problems where you might be trying to apply AI, but if you're not training it on all the data that has all of the different edge cases and different formats that you might encounter in the real world, you may not actually be building something that's going to be successful. There's also just a ton of situations that simply don't have enough training data for the models to be successful. So this is stuff like uncommon diseases, smaller demographics like children or minorities. And then not to mention, there's just tons of edge cases that confuse the AI models. I think one of the examples was where the AI was confusing staples for like hemorrhages or something like that.
A big difference.
Yes. And I've only mentioned like the technical hurdles so far, and there's like a wealth of like societal challenges on top of that. Like the article mentioned that like malpractice insurers refuse to cover decisions made by an AI model, right? So like you still have to have a human making decisions on all of these things if you want to have insurance. And then they cited a couple of studies from the NIH. The first was from 2024 that found that 48% of radiologists are using AI. And then a second survey in 2025 found that in orgs that are using AI, only 19% of them reported a high degree of success. Like that's pretty low. So 80%, 4 out of 5 AI users in healthcare are not reporting high degrees of success. And you mentioned like radiologists, they spend a lot of their time doing other things other than interpreting images, just like developers spend tons of their time doing other things other than writing code. So even if AI replaced 100% of that part of their job, there would still be the other 2/3 of their job. So, AI isn't replacing their job. It's simply augmenting a single aspect of their work. And I think at the end of the day, like this is a technology problem. I think these challenges will eventually be solved. I think we're going to see AI doing more and more extraordinary things in the coming years. But I also think we're going to see more stories like this over the next year or two that expose how like artificial general intelligence isn't coming for your job and may not be coming at all in the near term, and that the productivity improvements from AI that you're hoping for are going to take longer to realize than all of those hypesters and evangelists out there might have you believe. So.
Well, speaking of jobs, our last article here is about a little bit of advice for when you're looking for a new job. This is something that we've touched a bit on Dev Interrupted, but the realities of being in a role and understanding and knowing what's best for yourself, and maybe when it's time for a new opportunity or for growth or just for a change. And making that jump and making that decision for yourself is not only difficult, but it's brave, but it's also something that is kind of uncharted in many cases. So this article from Amy Vora on the hard parts of growth, we loved reading this last week. It has some really classic and timeless advice for professional development. It also gives, like I said, some useful tips for starting on that journey from someone who has a really powerful and really impactful career in terms of her background and the kinds of roles that Amy has had. So this is like learning from the best and how to really set the best vision of yourself and then go after it. So I really loved this one. Ben, what stood out to you in this article from Amy Vora?
Yeah, we all are familiar with that feeling of getting fed up with something at work and like immediately going out to LinkedIn and looking at all the job postings to fantasize about the grass that's on the other side of the fence.
Yes, get me out of here. Exactly.
We've all been there. But what I really like about the approach in this article is that it allows you to embrace that urge without or while turning it into something that can be productive at advancing your career without disrupting your work.
Yeah.
So it's kind of common knowledge, but I'll just reiterate it just so I am. It's healthy to regularly interview for new roles, like even if you aren't committed to leaving your current position. And the reason is that it helps you understand your strengths and values and forces you to plan ahead for your professional future. So, whether you end up reading this and deciding, actually, I want to stay where I am today, or you decide you're going to go out and find a new job, like these are all things that will help you as a professional in your current role, in your next role, wherever you're at today. So it's a really great read. We wanted to include it just because it's such helpful and useful advice.
Yeah, I especially loved her advice around writing a pitch about yourself and giving it.
Yeah.
I think before starting any job search, like you called out, you need to be confident about who you are and what you're looking to do, how you're looking to achieve it. And oftentimes that pitch, it already exists somewhere in your mind. You've already convinced yourself, or you've told your friends, or maybe your mom or whoever, right, about what you're going to do next. And it's all about writing it down and iterating on it and treating it just like how you would any of your best work. You should always treat your career like it's your best work. So really great advice. Love reading this one. And yeah, that's our news roundup for the week. It's been a pretty good discussion, but staying up ahead on Dev Interrupted. After the break, we'll be sitting down to hear from Cloudflare. So stick around. Today, we're talking to Brendan Irvine Broque, the director of product at Cloudflare, a company that needs no introduction, by the way, because it runs the internet at scale and has a front row seat to the way things like MCP are hitting big engineering orgs. And back in March on Dev Interrupted, we covered Brendan's article actually in a news segment, an article about building and deploying remote MCP servers to Cloudflare, and it opened a whole new world for us. As you know, we've been talking about MCP on Dev Interrupted for a little bit now, and I've been tinkering with it as well. We've been following the remote MCP story, and today we're going to find out why MCP server adoption is dominating team agendas and why Brendan's hearing it from everyone that he talks to in leadership right now. And what does it even mean to get something like that right? So, Brendan, welcome to Dev Interrupted.
That's a wonderful introduction. Thanks so much for having me on here.
Great. Well, we're really excited to have you here. And I want to kind of start by talking about Cloudflare itself, because it's in a really unique position and it operates as like really the ultimate proving ground for anything that's going to make it on the web, I think. At Cloudflare, I imagine y'all are dog fooding internet at scale, and any tool that succeeds and works for your teams internally has the potential to transform the entire internet. And that's a really high stakes for internal adoption and a story everyone would be curious about. So I'm wondering, when you introduce a powerful new technology like MCP inside of Cloudflare, what's like a guiding principle at Cloudflare that you come back to?
Yeah. So what we talk about at Cloudflare so often is when we build products, we're building for like our own internal customer zero first. We're building things that are part of our own platform, but we use our own platform ourselves. And that's what, that internal dogfooding is what makes it good for our own customers. I wouldn't feel good as a product leader if I'm telling a customer of Cloudflare's that they should go and adopt something if, we're not really using it ourselves. And so we always come back to that. And it's, for example, internally, we use a lot of our own MCP servers when teams are debugging their own Cloudflare workers and they want to ask observability questions about what's going on. And that kind of feeds back into our own teams and our own product development and what we need to kind of make better for our external customers as well. There's kind of just something to engineers on a team being able to talk to really easily to engineers who are building that platform feature and kind of like go back and forth really, really quickly in fast cycles.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk a little bit more about observability in this world with you, especially as we kind of start to guide along the MCP story here. And I'm curious, like within Cloudflare, where would you say the spark began for MCP and using it? Like, was there maybe like an experiment that somebody spun up, or was it a strategic top-down directive? What did it look like?
So for us, we're obviously paying attention, kind of ears to the ground on what do developers want to build. And I remember it was almost a year ago now, kind of hearing about MCP coming out of Anthropic and this kind of new protocol for kind of agents talking to APIs and to other agents. And so, we got excited because a lot of what we see our customers doing with Cloudflare Workers is, they're building some bit of software that needs to talk to some other API and service, and people are starting to build AI agents on us and exploring those different things with durable objects and all kinds of different things that are possible on Cloudflare. And it was funny because initially, we had some ideas ourselves about like how should different services be able to communicate with each other and how might that work. And when we saw MCP come out, we said like, okay, well, there's a lot of interesting people behind this and maybe there's a thread to pull on. And it was all local at the time. We kind of hacked some different things together. And, there were some people who were interested in MCP, but it didn't really blow up until probably the first couple months of 2025.
Mm-hmm.
And really for us, it was just about meeting the moment of like what developers want to build. First and foremost, it was maybe less at that point about like internal adoption and different things. It's just like there's so much excitement from people in the community.
Yeah, I can really relate to that because what I saw with MCP when it hit the scene is it became like a new primitive on which everyone could build in the same way that AI was a new primitive where everything and anything before in engineering could interact with AI and it would radically change what that was before. Everything that went through it was different. MCP was the same because it's modular, and there became an MCP for everything, right? You had this sudden proliferation once, like you said earlier in 2025, when it started to catch on, you started to get these MCP server directories and a repo for every kind of MCP connector that there was. And, everyone has read the articles on Medium of folks being like, you can't just map one-to-one your API to MCP, but that doesn't mean no one did. So all of the APIs that do exist, they've kind of been started to push through this MCP world, right? So I think you're right though that it comes down to like finding like the value and the usage, and you saw it as like, oh wow, there's something to experiment with here. There's like a building block that people can use, and that's what Cloudflare I think is looking for. Like with things like durable objects and the whole Cloudflare ecosystem is about the building blocks to deliver the web. So the MCP was evolving as one of those.
I mean, at the end of the day, what people are trying to do, right, is that they're trying to figure out as businesses, how do they fit into all of these different kind of AI clients, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or Cursor or whatever is going to come next. And recognizing that what you build when that is the interface that your customers use looks a lot different than a website with its own interface. In some sense, I mean, this is now something that I feel like everybody says, but at the time we were saying it ourselves was like, these different AI tools are like the new web browsers. You go first to ChatGPT, you don't go to Chrome. And I think at the time, the only thing we believed in strongly was like, I don't know, the future probably isn't just more and more and more Chrome tabs. I think we all hit a breaking point in our browser around that. And just trying to help internet businesses and companies figure out how they plug in. And the auth piece of MCP, especially initially, was really the hardest hurdle for people to get through if we wanted to make that leap early on from this is all local and really only for all of us software engineers and developers to run ourselves and make something that was truly accessible that, everyone in a large organization or consumers can use.
Right, and accessible and secure, something that was built more to scale. And it sounds like that was like a signal, right? Like a milestone to MCP that Cloudflare had to meet that mission first of making it secure, making it something that could work remotely and in a server, right? And that multiple folks connect to a managed service has a whole different world to it than the MCP servers that live locally, right? So um, was that I guess the movement within Cloudflare, you are able to do that, and then you can say, okay, maybe this has legs. Now, how do we scale this to the rest of the internet?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we picked up on initially was, especially in the first iteration of the MCP spec, it was actually pretty hard to figure out how to manage this kind of long-lived connection that a client has to have with an MCP server. And one of the unique things about Cloudflare's developer platform is that, we have this really interesting primitive we call durable objects, which you can kind of think of as these like stateful workers that they're these singletons. And so you can, create an infinite number of these and you can connect to them. And we saw this like easy kind of way to say, okay, well, maybe elsewhere it would be hard for each session with an MCP server to kind of have its own instance that it's connecting to. But there was just this like very natural fit for us. And one of the things that I'm really excited about right now is that a lot more people are starting to recognize that MCP isn't just this protocol for like, an agent or some other tool to talk to a set of APIs, but can be a protocol for agents talking to other agents. And the reason that was kind of this thing that hit us over the head was, well, our model has always been with the things that we build with agents that they're all, you can create an infinite number of instances of agents and it's just a kind of like naturally fit like a glove. And so I'm really excited about that future of like MCP as a protocol for agents to communicate.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I'm familiar with durable objects. I've used them before, and that's the exact mapping that I see too. Is like, wow, talk about how Cloudflare is already built to deliver that exactly how it was, and so it's just really cool to see that internal journey and how y'all meet the mission. And when you take that focus outward, you yourself are in this really unique position where you take all of this product knowledge and this really global domain knowledge from Cloudflare, and you bring these to these engineering leaders who meet with you. And when you do sit down with them, you see a lot of patterns emerging. That's what you and I talked about in our initial conversation. Patterns between all of these leaders, the questions they ask, the concerns that they have. So what do you think is like the number one question burning in all of their heads right now?
I mean, so many of the engineering leaders I talk to have done a wonderful job of kind of spinning up these tiger teams or small groups of engineers who are, whether they're creating agents or MCP servers or different ways that their company can use AI. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, how am I going to give this to really big org where I, don't know everybody and maybe there's a new hire who's going to show up next Tuesday. And how do I do that safely? And how do I also just understand what people are using or getting value out of, or kind of roll this out securely? And so we've heard that over and over and over. That's just like such an interesting, consistent theme is like, I think engineering leaders really get it, that this is what's going to accelerate their organization. And so we spent a bunch of time kind of building these kind of MCP portals back into Cloudflare's set of zero trust products to be able to give people these tools to kind of administer a set of MCP servers to their team and kind of create this gateway that they can hand over and say, here's a set of tools that, maybe me as an engineering director, I want this set of teams to be able to use. And maybe there's a different set of tools that a different group of users, I want to make sure that they have access to. So that kind of rollout and management of everything is a big problem in the space. And so I'm excited about the things that we're trying to do for people there.
Yeah, the rollout is a challenge because part of it is the technology. Another big part of it is like the people and the communication process behind it. And I like that you called out that everyone's done a really good job at Tiger teams. I think that is universal across the board. Everyone has identified the opportunity, fostered that curiosity, hopefully at this point, and have assembled those first movers, those heavy users, those early adopters, and gotten them to kind of start pulling the cart forward, right? And our own company, we have those internally. Many of our listeners, they relate with the story too. But outside of that, like you get that cluster of people who are very much aboard and can see it. How getting more people on board can be more difficult, especially when you're dealing with folks with all different levels of AI interaction and comfortableness. So do you see teams get stuck anywhere, or are there things that jump out at you as opportunities?
I mean, one of the most basic ways that people get stuck is, because in some sense, progress has happened so much faster than I think many people would have expected with so many MCP servers getting built. And a lot of these servers expose so many different tools. And it's really easy to say, well, I need access to this, 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 and this, and install a bunch of things. And suddenly you've blown up the context window. LLM is quite confused because you've given it 25 tools that all start with the word update. And, somebody comes along and maybe they're less familiar with context engineering and, how this stuff works behind the scenes. And they're just like, it doesn't really work for me. I'm not getting the results that I want. And so, a lot of what I see people going through right now who are building MCP servers is starting to rethink like what tools should or shouldn't be available. Maybe we've gone overkill. Maybe we've exposed too many things. Or more nuance in terms of like which tools I actually do want to enable for certain use cases and in different contexts or groups of people.
Yeah.
I think that every team wants to move really fast with AI, and a lot of people made these big pushes to get MCP servers out the door. And now we're just in this cycle of people saying like, well, how do you measure the success of a MCP tool? When
Yeah.
you think about that, it's actually like a really, really hard problem of like, oh yeah, the tool runs. Does it give you a response? Like, yes, it's available, but like, is that response good? Well, I can pull on this thread and say, well, I can do my own evals for it, but I'm dreaming up how I use it. You might use it in a totally different way. Like evals for tools are remarkably hard, especially when you don't control the client.
Yeah, you called out a really good thing here. We talked about it a bit on Dev Interrupted as well about evals in the world of understanding how AI is used and how they're a helpful tool, but they're just one part of the picture. And there's other things too, like more of an observability level of understanding even what was the data that went into it, making that ultimate response that it did. Because in many cases, you have MCP servers that are maybe connecting to data platforms and surfacing information. And they're doing that with tool calls, sure. But then like, what data did it actually get? Where did that data come from? In places with a lot of data, that is a huge question. So there's all these different parts that have to be like very carefully utilized. And I also like that you called out that if you have a zillion tools, like it's not going to work. I have experienced this. If you are listening to this and you're using MCP servers and you have a whole bunch of them hooked up to something right now, like Cursor or VS Code, I'm begging you, please go in there and turn some of them off, or understand how many tools that you are exposing to your LLM at any given time, because it really does up the level on confusion. And so like all of these little pitfalls, right? We're learning them all together as an industry in real time. We're all writing the blog posts about them. We're all rediscovering those engineering principles underneath. And, many leaders are building stuff on top of this too. And it sounds like maybe there's a framework that folks should bring to it when making decisions around MCP adoption. And maybe those are things that are rooted in like security or compliance. But I'm just wondering if there's any like big themes that jump out at you.
One that I've seen, one kind of category of MCP servers that I've seen work remarkably well has been everything around observability. And, one of the classic kind of concerns that engineering leaders I've had when I've kind of run engineering teams before is you maybe have 4 or 5 different tools and systems for how you get logs, traces, metrics, data, use like a Datadog, a Honeycomb, a Cloudflare, all these things.
Right.
And how do you pull this stuff all together? You go to debug things in an incident and you're saying like, well, I got to pull up 6 or 7 different tabs in Chrome and like correlate different things just to figure out like, okay, it's this. And, I've talked to so many people who have found success just saying, here's an MCP server where I can query kind of logs or metrics or data from one system, and I can bring in the other MCP server and I can have an agent just look at correlation and look at what might be happening here and piece the two things together. And the reason I bring it up is that it's just a successful use case, but it's also pretty universal to engineering teams. Everybody has to debug things. And it's reasonably focused in that like, you're not trying to roll out all of the possible things that people could do with tools and AI at once. And it's fundamentally, it's read-only. And so some of the things that we're worried about of, exposing a tool that can then mutate and change data or do some dangerous operation, somewhat start to fade. And, if you've done the right sanitization of logs for PII and other things, like you're actually in a pretty good spot. And so that's the use case that I'm just seeing like work pretty consistently out of the box.
Yeah. And it's taken us time, obviously, as an industry to even get there, right? Because MCP has been on the scene now for about a year or so. Like we're coming up on it being in the scene for a little while, but it's gone through a lot of phases of evolution in that time and adoption and becoming more mainstream. And, something that you mentioned in our initial call is a lot of folks that were early to the MCP scene and building stuff on top of it and making tools with it, then would have to maybe like reset or kind of go back to the drawing board once they tried to take it out to more broadly their teams or however they wanted to ship it. So what was like the most common, like, we got it wrong moment that you saw from your perspective in that world?
I mean, the classic thing of translate a API schema one-to-one into a bunch of tools. I mean, that's the clearest one. Um, I think, there's interesting nuances to this, right? Where it's like forgetting about the importance of descriptions. At the end of the day, we're also used to, because we're engineers, we're programmers, being like, okay, well, the method is called this. And so like, yeah, I need to leave like a JS comment that describes stuff, but like half the time I don't really remember to do it that well. Like to the model, that's like the information that tells you what you're supposed to use this for and
Yeah.
gives you the context. It's literally like it's in the context window. And some of the patterns that I've seen people try and it's work pretty well is like I've seen people develop some interesting mini evals frameworks to say like, how would I iterate on my tool descriptions to figure out what's actually going to get me the best results, and just really thinking about the fact that I'm not taking a set of APIs and exposing them just as like APIs the way that my programmer brain would work, but like I have to think about there's a model at the end of the day on the other side of this, and what is it doing with all of this?
Yeah, it's almost like there was a call to action where people learned in there that it was about combining those API calls together into what made the most sense. It was about, in the old world of traditional engineering where you would maybe have that function that updates something in a person's cart. Maybe it fetches the cart in the first place, and even fetches info about the user. Maybe it updates, maybe it has to fetch the product list and then to filter out the product. Like maybe there's a whole bunch of API calls in there. If you map that one to one, we all learned that now you're asking the LLM to successfully thread 4 or 5 tool call interactions together. Maybe like you said, you have 10 tools enabled and they all have an update function in there somewhere. So it's trying to pick even the right tool in the toolbox to pick up. So kind of dialing up the determinism is really important. And that's what MCP gives us with AI. I think that's why it's a powerful primitive. And then additionally, and this is kind of where I'm curious to lean on your perspective, your expertise here at Cloudflare is, you bring it into the infrastructure, you make it remote, you put it behind authentication, you put it somewhere where it's a managed service. And now suddenly you can see everything it talks to, everything that goes in and out of it, all of the tool calls, all of everything that it learns and understands. And what does that level of observability like give you that people who are maybe only up until now have experienced local MCP servers, they don't even know about it?
That's interesting. I guess there's 2 layers to this. One is, what is the inference that's happening? At Cloudflare, we have a product called AI Gateway that kind of sits in between an application and kind of upstream inference, whether that's running on Cloudflare or that's running on, OpenAI, Anthropic, et cetera. So that gives you like one layer, and there's other platforms that do this as well, of like, what are the inference calls that are happening? And then there's like, well, what are the tool calls that are happening? And you kind of need both to paint the full picture of what happened and to understand, like, kind of like almost session replay what's going on. And I think that once you start to look at that and see real world use cases, the thing that I think we're seeing most now is how many times we're going back through the agentic loop. How many times we're going and saying like, I'm gonna run inference, I'm gonna call a tool, I'm gonna come back to the model. The model's gonna think for a second, go call a tool, and we're just gonna go over and over. And that's great because, these models are phenomenal and amazing, but they're also, takes time, it's a meaningful cost. And there's a lot of really, really interesting people, I think right now this summer, who are kind of pushing at the edges of what might be different compute models here. Like there are agents that write their own code. There's all kinds of approaches to this that may make this just way, 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 way faster or way, way, way less expensive to run.
Yeah. So, remote MCP being something that I I think people are still getting used to and learning to adopt, right? And there's a lot of like questions that it solves around taking something like this to production, or even letting folks like your customers access it maybe in a read-only way to use your data as a primitive for their own AI workflows and tools, all things that we're experimenting with and that matter right now to engineering teams that are shipping products used by engineers, especially. So like, are there maybe less obvious, there's obvious security advantages to making it a managed service, but are there less obvious ones that like at Cloudflare that y'all have become more aware of as people pull it out of the local computer grasp and put it somewhere remotely?
I mean, well, one that I think is a little bit underappreciated is almost everybody who's built one of these things to date, what they're doing at the end of the day is they're taking an existing API that they walked in the door with that already existed coming in 2025, and they're putting in some MCP server, some layer in front that sits between, a client and that API. And, that's why this stuff has grown really fast, is that you can do that. You can just kind of retrofit this existing piece of software. And 2025 is the year of OAuth RFCs becoming the hottest topic in the world.
Absolutely.
I have read more this year than any other year in my life combined. And what gets fun is you realize like, wow, there's all of these amazing specs that, people have been fighting for years and trying to make happen, but maybe there wasn't the use case to push it over the edge around like, finer grain authorization, et cetera. And most of these downstream APIs that people already have don't really support as fine grain authorization as, company building them probably would want in this age of AI where this stuff really starts to matter.
Yeah.
And I say all that because this middle layer of an MCP server, it actually sits in an interesting role where if you wanted to enforce a different kind of more granular form of authorization, you can do things like that. Or, you're building on top of an existing API you offer and it doesn't offer the right granularity of scopes. You could enforce some of that layer within an MCP server, or enforce different types of guardrails. And if there's a dangerous operation, you can kind of hedge against that. So there's some interesting threads to pull on there where you can kind of sit in the middle. The other one that we've done some cool demos around, Dina Kozlov, who's on my team, work really closely with, she did a great presentation at the MCP conference a couple months ago about MCP servers that have their own memory and can remember what a user has asked them in the past. And this is one of these questions that I think is getting asked by everybody who's investing in AI companies, right? Like, is the user's memory just going to be a thing that OpenAI controls or Anthropic controls? And there's some great ideas both like within our own developer platform with startups that are built on top of Cloudflare that kind of let people bring memory across platforms and persist that over time.
That's really interesting. It really highlights how, as a layer, remote MCP servers become almost like a decentralization layer that allows people to control that bespoke experience that they bring with them. They plug into other tools that maybe remembers things from them in other sessions, or how they use things, or what they're authenticated for. It kind of it decouples from the LLM provider, from going to ChatGPT or going to Claude directly. It decouples those things like the tool, but also memory, experience, personalization. That's an interesting customization tool, and also the one around security, or rather enforcing scopes, because I know that's a paradigm folks have been grappling with. So, maybe we'll follow up with you to get a link to some of that for the show notes, so folks can go check it out, especially learn more about the talk that you mentioned as well. I'm curious too, just kind of on like a user level, Brendan, are there MCP servers that you like to use that maybe you like to call out? Or I'm curious, like, how do MCPs fit into your daily workflows?
I mean, I'm biased. I spend most of my waking hours probably here at Cloudflare. So I love working with our observability MCP server at Cloudflare. We've made a big bet there on just like trying to make observability something that's first class on our platform and is built in. So I'm always using that to kind of debug things that I'm building or trying out on our platform for the first time. I think that there's some really phenomenal examples that were built on Cloudflare by the team over at Block and Square. I remember seeing a demo when we did our demo day with them, and they built this really cool thing where you could take a picture of a menu, and then it analyzed the menu, and it would go and take the actions and the tool calls to kind of add that to a storefront where you could order online and see the menu, and like that store kind of went from being in the physical world only to being online. And you think about how many steps there are in that process. So I've been really blown away by that. You can feed these tools, higher order. Here's what I'm trying to do. Here's the project. Here's, what needs to happen. And they'll do the breakdown and all the kind of like boring administrative work. And you end up in a situation where you feel very organized, even if you're not an organized person.
Yeah. Yeah. I really identify with that. And I like personally using the MCP tools where I can envision how they can be used with a bunch of other tools. I typically don't pick up the tool if I don't see it as like, oh, this is like a baseline primitive for working on XYZ. Like, maybe something that accesses my Slack messages might be something that's useful because I can use as a launching point for a lot of different workflows, projects, and things like that. So, and I love that you gave a shout out to Block. We love Block here at Dev Interrupted, especially everything that they're working on with Goose. I've done live streams with them as well, with Goose, and then trying out different MCP servers. So we love everything over at Block, and highly agree that there's some really cool innovation happening out there right now. But and as we've kind of talked now, this whole time about the MCP world and how it's grown within Cloudflare, and Cloudflare's really unique perspective on this whole problem. We've kind of dug into why remote MCP is important. But is there anything top of mind that you want to leave our audience with? Because I think that there's going to be new revelations on the future about how this tool is really used and how things like MCP can deliver even like UI experiences into chat. Like there's this new thing, it's relatively new, at least, MCP UI. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, with being able to basically render iframes, basically, HTML fragments, almost like a shadow DOM within a chat platform. And so the idea of bringing the experiences of tools and other platforms, not just accessing the APIs through MCP, but actually bringing the experiences into the AI chats we're all using, that seems like a really cool future. I'm curious if you've seen that and what that looks like to you.
Yeah, shout out to Ito and the team working on MCP UI. I remember when this was just like this early idea that a couple people were talking about, and that feels like yesterday.
I know,
So
yesterday.
I'm blown away by how quickly people have been able to make this happen. I mean, the mental model that I get excited about is that, if we really take seriously this premise that your AI agent is kind of a primary interface. Not that like the web browser is going away or anything like that, but like so many people are turning to that first. What you might want to expose as a business back to those tools, want to have some degree of influence over how that's presented back to a person. And at the start, when there was no kind of concept of UI that a MCP server can return back, felt like, oh, like this is all kind of up to the agent to decide how this all gets rendered. If I give you geolocation, will you render a map correctly? And what's exciting is the idea that there could be a future, at least to me, where you can go to these tools and get the benefits that come with that, but that the services that you're talking to can still have some influence over the shape and the style and the presentation of things, because that they're probably the best position to say how that information, that content should be presented. But then that they create these opportunities that I think a lot of people have wanted on the web for a really long time, around being able to standardize interface and like design units, kind of design systems, right? Like, why is it that iOS apps are often really nice to use? Is that there are these kind of UI patterns that are fairly hard to implement. Like UI engineering is hard, but they're part of a system and you can kind of benefit from them for free. And I do wonder a lot about if MCP UI is like a way into that for the web in a way that many people have tried in the past of web components and all the
Right.
different kind of shots on goal that we've had. So I've had some great chats with Michael Greenwich, who's wonderful at WorkOS, who worked on Radix about this, and excited for the future.
Yeah, we are too, and excited to keep chatting about things like this. And it's been really fun, Brendan, to have you on the show and to get your perspective. Really appreciate you spending some time with us and lending your perspective to our audience. And MCP is everywhere right now. And in this episode, in this conversation, we really focused on it. And just before we wrap, is there anywhere that obviously everyone knows what Cloudflare is and where to find Cloudflare, but is there anything in particular you want to direct folks' attention to that's maybe top of mind?
Go check out agents.cloudflare.com. We're doing a ton in this space of helping people build AI agents on Cloudflare. Check out the Cloudflare blog. We got a lot of interesting stuff coming. Love to, reach out, meet different people, use Cloudflare, send me things that are good and bad. We always love to hear the feedback from everybody out there. We take our kind of role in the ecosystem pretty seriously. You can reach out to me at Irvine Broque. It's my last name. And yeah, thank you.
Amazing. We'll make sure we include all of the links, the stuff that we talked about, like these blog posts and the talks and stuff, and in the show notes for today. And so to those listening, thanks for joining us here on Dev Interrupted. Like Brendan said, please, reach out to us on LinkedIn, continue the conversation. We want to hear from y'all about what you thought about today's conversation. What are you doing with MCP servers? And until next time, we'll see you here on Dev Interrupted.